Cool. So y'all are all interested in becoming game developers, right? Is that sort of the, okay, cool. I've worked with EGaDS quite a bit. I teach in the film department, and I teach CGI and some game stuff, and some visual effects. So I see a lot of people. And I have online classes that are pretty easy to get into, accessible. So I meet a lot of people that way. Cool. Well, trying to think of, this is actually my second sort of guest lecture today, which is so weird. And I was just talking to like prospective freshmen, which is a different kind of crowd. And I usually like to figure out like who the audience, later in the May, I have one that's like to retirees, to older people who are just sort of interested in animation and games. And so it's different, right? And I was trying to think like, okay, I'm going to roll into this group, and they're all going to be probably pretty savvy about maybe how you probably all have games that maybe you're kind of working on in your head, or actually, like have made, or, whatever, executing these ideas. And I have a ton of lectures about that, how to do those little things, how to do that painterly look in a game engine. And I don't know, it all sort of comes from the perspective of art. I never really pursued coding. I liked to draw, and I was into games, and through a variety of different good fortunes, I ended up doing that for a number of years. So I have a sort of a general introduction, the bentroduction, I call it. I'll run through it real quick. This is what I look like in college. No. Actually, I do think I'm about 14 in this picture, so not far off. But I'm from Texas, and sort of lived all over. I lived in a couple of the big cities, and then I lived in a little town called Azle, Texas, which is northwest of Fort Worth. I went to high school and undergrad here in Austin at UT. Here's some brothers and sisters. I have kids. I like to draw. Okay, so that's my angle. How I got into games is just simply by drawing, not too bright. Okay, just the guy who draws. Like I was in all the honors classes, but I would just draw. I do my best drawing when I should be paying attention. And then here's just some doodles that I do. In my classes, I like to sort of talk about the act of creating marks and how they're sort of corresponding actions within CGI, within the implementation of user agency. There's this sort of like this moment where you make it happen, the doodle, and if you can get good at sort of doing it unconsciously, repeating and making almost a game, you know what I mean? You just build that muscle memory, which is something that I really try to cultivate in my students. I like to, here's some more drawings. I classify myself as just an okay illustrator, even though I studied it in school, but I'm getting better, which pleases me. And now I'm more able to sort of execute the vision that I guess I have in my head. I don't really see it in my head because it's vague until I start drawing. And then in some sense, it becomes itself. It comes to whatever, fullness or being. So anyway, some more stuff. I like sci-fi, as you can guess. Can we get it any darker in here? I love a dark, dark room. I don't know. I know the projector has a little bit of a blur. Anyway, lots of drawings. I have a bunch of stuff, paintings. This is a painting meant to be viewed in VR. I did cartoons professionally for a number of years, mostly backgrounds, and I was really into cartoon backgrounds as a kid, and I got to work on some characters and all sorts of stuff. And I worked at video games for 12 years full-time. Just that's the only thing I did. Yeah. Did you work on a Scanner Darkly? I did. Yeah, I was an animator on a Scanner Darkly. I did most of the backgrounds in the movie, and I did. We had it by character, so I did a lot of Woody Harrelson and some Keanu, who's very easy to animate because this is Keanu. So you just draw one frame and hold it. Robert Downey Jr. moves like this. You have to do it. You get the Robert Downey Jr. team was always like checking in. I only got 1 second done, and I was like, I did 1,500 frames of Keanu today. This is actually pre-inked, pre-rendered background for a Spyro game on Nintendo GBA or DS. I can't remember. I did it in pencil, and then this is inked in Photoshop. I got into video games through concept art. So, you know, I think there's this idea that like all concept art must be really finished out. But there's, you know, there's a lot of concept art that the art director is supposed to say no to. Okay, that's sort of part of the process. And so that never ends up in the coffee table book. I don't know if I'm exposing too much about my life as a concept artist, but my first task as a concept artist was to simply conceptualize plants for 2 weeks straight. And I ran out of ideas about drawing plants like about 41 minutes into Monday. I was like, I don't know any more about plants. I have to research a lot. Here are some concepts that are more designy, like it's a puzzle. This is a sundial that you can control the time of day. And so I developed sort of this icon language, and I ended up modeling it out. And yeah, so I put up a lot of characters yet because my thing was kind of like worlds levels, right? That's what I like to draw. I like to draw sci-fi places and fantasy places, and so that it's kind of a good fit for a lot of video games. I don't know if you heard. Yeah, here's some more. There's the plants. I made a special sheet of just my best pencil drawings of plants, and then I ended up doing the Photoshop color treatments after the ones were okayed, and then I ended up modeling them. So the iterative process is happening, like even with pencils on paper for me. So this actually ended up being a texture for stained glass. That's the tutorial level, you know, lava level. It was on that game, Vex, for PS2, GameCube, and original Xbox. So budget of $30 million, about half of it went to advertising. Heads up. And yeah, so the only half of it went to actually making the games. At that time, it's pretty big. Those mascot wars. Worked on a few more titles. This is an adaptation of a comic book, and so we had to do very hard lines. The aesthetic is trying to mimic, not Hellboy comic, but it definitely has a graphic quality to it, and we had to sort of cut that into the geometry. This is back in '98 and stuff like that. So, you know, we could do things like radiosity and global illumination in sort of high-end CGI packages, but we would bake that into vertex colors. And I got very good at vertex painting, which had a weird sort of resurgence not too long ago. Here's some other levels I worked on. Here's Assassin's Creed, I forget which, for Game Boy DS. And I just made a speeder bike for fun. I made this whole level, the Roman Colosseum, without using polygons. Okay, so I bet all of you know what a polygon is and what it looks like in a game, okay? Almost the whole thing is spline renders, okay? And I challenged myself to build an entire environment without polygons. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? I got bored, I guess. I learned a lot about drawing. It made my drawing better to work with video games because, you know, you in CGI, because you're always sort of, you find the word, oh, I would always draw it with that thing. And then you realize, oh, that's the specular highlight, right? It quantifies that. And then you're like, oh, there's this thing. And if you do it in some negative, I always plug in negative values to an artist because I'm an artist. I'm gonna break it, right? Put in a negative value for something and see how the CGI sort of digests that, and sometimes it creates real fresh looks and stuff like that. Did that a lot. Yep, there's some of those hand-drawn background, hand-painted. Each one takes about a week, 40 hours to paint. And this actually had palette cycling animation, if you know what that is. And so we didn't have individual frames of animation. We palletized it, and then we arranged it so it would be like gradients of blue. And then you could say the 7th one go to 14 and 14 go back to 7. You can march a sequence of palettes, and you see it in real old games, but it makes an incredibly lightweight animation, and it's very good for water, flowing water. So what you're not seeing here is the flowing and sparkling water that I did with palette cycling, because it's a little harder to get that back. So I worked on a few Spyro games. I started this company, and I guess they picked up the license, and I hadn't really seen Spyro. I didn't have a PS1, I guess, when it came out. And so it had gone through a whole bunch of different iterations, but it was fun to sort of jump into. This was full 3D on the Game Boy DS, and just, again, my focus is environments. And so just to let you know, there's sort of characters and effects and environments. The entire environment budget for a level in this Game Boy DS game, this includes polygons and textures with the vertex colors painted in, was 128K. I said K. For the entire level. And what that really helped me do is like make hard choices. What is the essence of brick. How do I make it look like grass? You have to be so parsimonious. You have nothing. You're like, and we would do our textures black and white and do gradients like that with vertex coloring. I was running radiosity solutions on things that were like, 100 polys for the little level. You know what I mean? Like I was throwing as much as I can, and it was all about vertex colors at that point. So anyway, now I look at game engines, I teach that stuff. I'm like, oh, you're so spoiled. But you know what? I could always, it was easy, is like, it's such a manageable little thing that if I did all of the simulation stuff and I wanted to art direct it, if I wanted a vertex to be purple, I just got out the purple brush and I made it purple. You know what I mean? And you could set your brushes to screen and multiply too, even with vertex painting. And so if you get the hang of it, making marks and vertex painting, it can be, now that we have all sorts of hand painted textures too, but the vertex painting is sort of a fun thing. I'm not proud of everything I've worked on. I said the first game had this advertising thing, like 15% of it went to all of that. I mean, 15 million, 50%, half of it. And then I was sort of on the other end, this is not shovelware, but if you're working with a company like whatever, Universal Pictures or Activision, whoever's releasing the DVD of this movie is also gonna want a box in GameStop on the DS thing, okay? So this is a game that's essentially made as an advertisement for the DVD. You get that? But these games can be really fun to work on because really what they want is they're gonna pay a game company to make a game and walk it all the way through, publish it, right? So you've done this, you've proven it, and you bid and you got the bid. It's not a lot of money, but it's just a couple people and y'all are scrappers and you're gonna make it happen, right? This team was like 5 people, right? And there's one of them's an audio. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like crazy. I wore so many hats on a game like this, but what they don't follow up on is anything about the game. So you can actually make the wildest, craziest, you know what I mean? As long as you don't have blood or whatever they say in their art Bible not to have. So I had a great experience a few times. I was lead artist on this, and this was great because it was part of Universal and they control the monsters. So like Werewolf and Frankenstein and all that, the monster movie group. And I got to go there to LA and I went into their sort of merchandising area or the wing of people who sit at desks and handle all of their property, the lawyers. And they have like every toy ever made of all of their stuff and all of the standees. Really fun place for just sort of a cube area. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. We implemented grappling mechanic, you know what I mean? And all those things animate, UV mapping, and we had some beautiful sort of pre-rendered UI things, that book I did, and we had some great boss fights, and a lot of these people, it was just a few of us. It was just like, I remember Aaron Pendley was the programmer and I was the artist, and then we brought in an animator for a little while, but then I did this whole game, you know what alpha and beta and gold. Okay, so I did all the art post alpha. Okay, it was all me. Everybody left the team, so I was all the particles and the UI and the animation and the environments. And there's a lot of effing levels in this game. There were a lot of bugs. It's like QA, we had a QA department. We were a satellite studio, so it got sent to a bunch of people. And then it was like a team of people complaining. And I was the only one who could fix it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, the foot goes through the wall. I was just dying, And they would say that like, if I hit my head on this 30 times and then pull my sword in and out as fast as possible and then do grapple 5 times and hit start over and over, then it crashes. And I'm like, I'm gonna downgrade this to a lower priority bug. Thank you. Get in trouble for that. Bulk was another one. Fully destructible environments. Okay, fully. Okay, this is another one that's like, we had to fit a lot. For each of these, by the way, there's two cameras rendering simultaneously. The background is a perspective camera, right? And the foreground is an orthographic. It has no foreshortening because the lead designer, Justin Leangang, who was a real pain in the ass, said that he wanted that old school, when Hulk's pixel touches that pixel, that's when it gets destroyed. None of this like whiffy 3D BS. He was not having it. He's like, we're going to use 3D models, but we're going to use an orthographic camera because I want pixel perfect collision, because this is Hulk and it's about doing as much damage as possible. And you can see there's like this echo effect where like you sort of like, you would just tear through a level, and we had swappable tiles for everything. So we would have like an edge. There's like all these different sort of environments. There was the slums in South America, and there was Brooklyn or something, Harvard Yard. And we would have edge, middle, door, window, roof, tiles, right? And each one of them would have 4 states. And so you'd hit the edge, and then there would be 3 random versions of it. And then your 2 random versions of it, and then you'd hit it again or 2 more times, and it would do the fully damaged version of it. And these were all 3D tiles that had just a little bit of relief, and then I'd have bricks sort of jut out so they would interlock and you wouldn't see the repetition. And so it was like doing tiling textures, but with sort of multiple sets possible at any one point. It was so hard. And because we had so many models, we had to make all the textures grayscale. In fact, most of the stuff was 4 colors in the index, because this is how much you're, but you know what? I can tell, you know what I mean? I can tell what it is. There's a danger, I think, in some of these new game engines. It's like, oh, so amazing. You know what I mean? So much. Assassin's Creed there, that was great fun to do. And there's some real stuff. There it is, vertex colored before you can see the textures go on. So this is just the raw geometry, but no, there was no dynamic lighting or anything like that. So anyway, fun. And then I did Wizards of Waverly Place. You guys ever seen that? Ever heard of that show? Yeah, I spent a season of my life sort of thinking about that show. And I watched every episode. I watched every episode of that show. And I once had an 11-hour meeting with like 5 Disney producers about Wizards of Waverly Place. And I never liked it. Not from the first moment that it went up. I'm sorry. I could tell that she was sort of into it. Some people really connect with it. I'm messing with you. But the thing is like when you work in games, like I've worked in a lot of different games, and some of them have been really exciting. Like, yes, I love sci-fi, and here's this world, and it's a 3D platform, and I get to design the plants. And then sometimes it's Wizards of Waverly Place, and maybe it's not quite your cup of tea, but it's like something that sort of an old timer told me once. Is like, you just have to find out what it is that these people are buying it for and celebrate it. You know, you have to find what is at the center of Wizards of Waverly Place and celebrate it. I think about that all the time. I'm just like, celebrate it, I guess. No. Anyway, yeah, so there's some of that. And then more and more people were asking me to do certain things for film. And I always liked I still hung out with the animator types who were sort of an indie film thing intersection. And then I always liked to be on set. I like to just hold the lights or the wind machine. I like to push the dolly. I'm very good at it. I have a very good sense of timing from all of my animation. So I'm actually sort of a special effects dolly operator. People call me in when they need it to be exactly 43 seconds from start to finish, and they need to repeat it at exactly the same speed. I really do think I'm pretty good at it. We've done a couple of videos where it was like the same person is doing something, and then we superimposed them. And a lot of it was the dolly work on set, where we really were like, and I would put tape down. I'm like, my foot needs to hit the 17-second right here, right? My toe needs to be here. So anyway, sort of brought a lot of that, I guess, carefulness to it, you know, to on set, which I really enjoy. And then I guess because of my experience sort of working with cameras and this idea of sort of building virtual worlds, like now of course, working at the university, I get to do all sorts of crazy things. People are like, you know, the Department of Anthropology wants some animation, you know, so it's real neat to be a part of that. And sometimes you feel like you're doing good, like, oh yeah, I'll do climate change, you know, like I can help with this in whatever way I can. But anyway, this is an interesting one where there's a virtual world. This was some years ago. And it's like Second Life, kind of, if you've ever played that. It's a little clunky, sluggish, you know, not very gamey. It's not like whatever, Fortnite, you know, it's older community. And, but you could stream live video into it. And so there I am on the lower right. I would sit in a trailer, and that guy next to me, Bruce, he would like, ESPN would contract him to do like special camera things. You know what I mean? So he has like a degree in mechanical engineering and computer science. You know what I mean? He's one of these people who's like and he just lives on the lake and has millions of dollars, and he works like 2 months of the year, you know, and they're like, come to Hawaii. Anyway, so he's a cool guy, and he's kind of like one of those guys who's like camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. He's like a director of that, and there are multiple camera people. And that was beamed into, live streamed into the virtual world and UV mapped onto a quad. And I also, it was green screen, and also I set up a camera in world. And so when you were on stage, you could see through the virtual camera into the world. And so you could live the actual, it was part of South by Southwest. Asleep at the Wheel was there on camera. And we had about 20,000 people from like Eastern Europe or something show up because it was South by Southwest and it was Asleep at the Wheel. And that was sort of a big Texas band, if you've ever heard of them. And so there were, for whatever reason, they were big there. So that was kind of cool. And just, you know, an operation like that on set, of course, there's all the, I would fly out and work on the virtual world, do it remotely. But on set, that kind of operation costs about $30,000 a day. So if you ever are in some sort of live event stream, which seems not unlikely, given the sort of thresholds that we're crossing lately with Meta and all that, you know, you might want to do that. Now I teach, but it really sort of feels more like hosting here in that, yeah, sure, I can lecture and I can teach you how to make a virtual world and all of that. I can do the long version of this over 15 weeks, multiple times. But, you know, being an RTF, a lot of it is sort of like, let's get the studio, let's get the motion capture volume going. You know, we're generating content and, you know, there's all of the usual sort of online component to it. And here I am at graduate, not my own. I'm on the stage here in the Irwin Center. So Ben Bays, Mr. Ben Bays. I'm not a doctor and I don't have an MFA or anything like that. And, you know, I'm not ashamed of that. Most of my peers do and colleagues do. Texan. Giving one to you now. Yeah, I sort of got here into the university through, you know, started by drawing and then 3D modeling. And then I just really took to palletizing stuff. And I enjoy talking to programmers. And I eventually got to a point where I was able to have a conversation with programmers and say, this is something that I would like visually to happen. And they would be able to implement it in the engine. But I was always, you know, very cognizant of like, you know, what my role is. And I always try to solve a lot of problems with art. Specifically, you know, I have a lot of students who are like, I just want to procedurally generate it. And I'm like, well, the time it would take you to do all that, like you could just do it by hand. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty easy to do that stuff. So anyway, I think the biggest thing about me entering the industry was just the sheer amount of time that I was suddenly focused on doing what I was interested in doing, which is what I think y'all all hope for, right? You're working on a game and it becomes sort of the thing, 9 to 5, right? And you get, if you get the opportunity sort of, I like working at a company, you know what I mean? I've been in a bunch of indie stuff and all of that sort of consulting and getting things started, but I'm not looking to be the king. I like to be the captain. So you just point me at something and I will try to. It sounds mean when you say it like that. I think that's my intro. I wasn't just supposed to do my intro this long. I actually have a talk that I was planning to give, and it's called the Impossible Lecture. It's called the Impossible Talk. And let me close that down. And you can find me. There's another Ben Bays out there, and he also does work in sci-fi visual effects. But I don't tell people that sometimes. I'm like, oh man, this guy worked on Babylon 5. I'm like, yeah, that was me too. Yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know why I brought this up, except if I listed some of the games in there that I worked on, and you can see all that stuff. Sure about it, but yeah. So the lecture, such as it is as I said, sort of ungivable, especially that we only have, I say, like what, 27 minutes if we skip the Q&A. So I'm just going to show it to you, okay? And I'm going to tell you what it is and what it isn't. And this is sort of based on something that I gave the other day for a group in advertising. So there's this group in advertising. They have the TXI. I don't know if anybody knows about that. Texas Immersive Institute or something like that. And they do a lot of sort of cool emergent media stuff, VR, obviously, right? And so what's happening is that Metaverse, whatever the fuck that is, sorry, beep, on the recording, whatever that is, and I have you know, I have opinions on it. I have seen nothing that's sort of is a sort of substantial sort of change in how any of this stuff that I just showed you, that weird Second Life thing. Okay, so right, it's the better version of it. But what I will tell you, and they're working with groups that are very interested in that, and they're under NDA, but let me tell you, they're working with some cool people. It's neat, and y'all would love it. Okay, so there's stuff going on in advertising. Games are wanting to engage with that, and it's like I see what they're doing. So essentially, what advertising is doing, a semester-long project. All of the seniors, okay, are doing this project where they are designing a new island or world, right, in the metaverse, right? And it's for a very high-profile client. And I think the idea is that they would conceptualize not only what it is, which is amazing, they get to sort of invent it, this group, but also how the marketing and branding and advertising, all of that plays out, right? So if you can imagine all the seniors, a semester-long project, right? And they have to execute all of these, the video campaign, and right, they got to crunch the numbers because they're advertised, and they got to make the other 15 million of my original game. That's what they're doing, right? But they have this opportunity to sort of conceptualize one of these new worlds. And I've been all sort of hot air and, you know, the metaverse is blah, blah, blah. But here's my take on it, is that it's not a new idea, right? We all know this. But what's happening right now is that the people with a lot of money are investing in it, right? Because now all of a sudden there's this interest in it, and there's this movement, and where they're putting money in is just a great time to be making virtual worlds, is all I'm saying. Because if, you know, we're crossing a threshold where hopefully this is being sort of taken up in a very popular way, in the same way that sort of streaming television sort of elevated all sort of film production, like all of a sudden, like everybody's got one. Anyway, I know I gather from your previous sort of guest that y'all are plugged into sort of the Austin indie, you know, all of that scene, and that is where it started with me too. I started here in Austin. And Mr. Tramps is the name of the happy hour that they were referring to, I think. But you can find it on a Facebook group. And also I would recommend the AAUGA, the Autodesk users group, because it's a mix of sort of visual effects, CGI people with game people, and you have some pretty advanced talks on rigging, and, you know, some of them, when they get specialized, are even over my head, which is pretty cool. So anyway, so the subject of this whatever talk that is about to be over is, well, I forget what I called it, speed run, right? Isn't that what I called it? Speed run. So what I wanted to do was I started thinking about this idea of like crossing a threshold and being able to invent this new virtual worlds, right? And so worlds are my thing, not characters. And so there's this whole thing about digital identity and representation, okay? And I am not going to talk about that, okay? So I got to tell you what I'm not going to talk about. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not going to talk about, and ultimately we'll end up with this. And so I wanted to focus on the sort of the touchstones in my life, the influences, I suppose, in a totally non-academic but slightly chronological way, of virtual worlds that I have been in, okay? So as a kid, what was the first sense that I had of like, oh, there's a world here? You know, it wasn't, I mean, there were things like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man, and these happened in the screen space. They were very sort of gamey, but where was the first time where I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm, you know, not that there was an end to it, but sort of continuing that idea. And then there's a lot of other conversations we can have about games, like the mechanics of it, right? And user agency and all of that. But what I wanted to talk about was simply the aesthetics of it, okay? So forget about, in this one you drive and in this one you jump, right? So much as this one is, you know, Super Mario Brothers creates this aesthetic that goes through many, many different generations. Still around, right? Super Mario Brothers look, that particular aesthetic. And so I put together this playlist. You can find it if you search for Ben Bass on YouTube. And I know this may be going up on YouTube, so I don't know how this is going to work. You can, whatever, find the link. And what I did is I went through all the games that I played. Oh, right. Also, it's not arcade, okay, because I couldn't fit all that in. And I also think the case, or whatever you call it, what do you call that? Cabinet, thank you, is really important for that. And of course, I hope that y'all all visit pinballs, but there's a place for little kids. I have a couple little kids. There's a place called Mount Playmore in North Austin, and actually they have some pretty good arcade games, including, I think they have 3 of those where you sit and the chair shakes and it's like a roller coaster. And they have 2 CG, you know, one of them does this whole thing. They have 2 CG, but they have one that's filmed with like a 16mm film camera. And they do it over the Grand Canyon and stuff like that. And it's amazing because the CG ones, of course, look super dated. But aside from the cabinet, which looks like it was from like 1980, the film one is like awesome. You know what I mean? Because they flew a plane through whatever the Grand Canyon. You're like, this is cool. This is so cool. Anyway, that's a part of that, I guess. And also, I didn't do PC games either. Okay, and I know that sort of personal computer stuff is, there's an entire ecosystem and it sort of feeds into this. So what I did is I put a list together, and I'm not even going to get to start it. And I put a list together. It's called Video Game Playthrough, and I tried to find complete walkthroughs of every game that I talk about, and without commentary. And I think it's at like 290 videos at this point. And some of them are, this one is, you know, 20 hours long. So anyway, we're already out of time. I'm not even sure if I should begin it at all. I can try. I don't know. Yeah, okay, I'll try. The thing is the beginning's better than the end because I get a little farther each time. But yeah, and so this is me. I'm a kid. I was born in 1973. I'll have to sort of like skim through these. So this is Night Driver for the Atari 2600. Okay. And you can see how this is set up, but the fact that I was going into the screen was just this like incredible feeling. Again, these are just touchstones. I should sign in. Oh, you know what? I need to sign in because I got the ad-free one just for this presentation. I bought it. What is my password? I would totally let everybody have access to all my accounts if I just didn't have to do passwords or Duo anymore. Like, you can have my money, you can have it all. Duo is the worst. Oh, here we go. What? It's always a new thing. Yes, it's me. Can't you tell just by my eyes or something? How fast I'm typing, how much pressure I'm putting on the keys. Asteroids, okay, classic. Destructible environments, right? And the destroyed pieces can hurt you. Pitfall, let me see, I gotta go. Oh my gosh, I'm like editing this as I go. Okay, Pitfall, let me go here. Pitfall. The scary thing about Pitfall is when you started, you were on the title screen, and each screen, it's one of these like unforgiving, like you don't have lives. Each screen gets you farther away from the title screen. And that always bothered me. I was always like, it's so far, you know, you knew you were going to be in big trouble if the whole thing fell apart. E.T., the extraterrestrial, a lot of people sort of have, there's lots of stories about this, but this is the first game where I felt vulnerable, and the environment was sort of this murky forest, and I was slow. You know what I mean? Like, it no longer was power and speed and stuff like that. Natural scrolling. Super Mario Brothers, of course, I think everybody's familiar with, and it sort of spawned a whole bunch of series. And later on, I get to Yoshi's Woolly World. I don't know if you've seen those, but some of the ones that do sort of craft material, special shader stuff are really interesting to me. I won't even do that one. Excite Bike was the first time I ever saw crowds. And that was a big sort of impact on me. And then I have had to make crowds quite a few times. And so crowds are not nothing to do, and can be a really sort of significant world building element. 1942 was the first game that I ever played where I felt like I was learning history or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, and I used this excuse through all of the Medal of Honor and the Call of Duty and oh wait, I'm learning about 1942. So anyway, then there's a whole sort of series of games like that. Of course, Legend of Zelda is a classic, and it's been talked about quite a bit, but my favorite part of this really struck me when I was a kid. Okay, In this game, yeah, in the beginning of this game, it's raining. It's dark. And at the time, this seemed really wild because everything else had been just in the middle of the day. There wasn't this sort of sense of, and then you go outside, you hear that rain. I just remember feeling like this is so beautiful. Kid Icarus was a sort of a Greek myth one, right? And that comes, but you can see Phoenix. Remember that? Have you seen that game? So pretty new, built on the Assassin's Creed engine. Very nice. And then we have Metroid came along and did a little bit better in terms of the franchise. Kid Icarus came back in Kid Icarus Phoenix Uprising, but as most known, I think, for Dark Pit and Smash, if anybody plays Smash Brothers, both whatever Pit and Dark Pit. And then there's all of the Super Metroids and Castlevania, and of course those two sort of exploratory Gothic and that sort of quiet abandoned space based, both kind of similar ideas in some ways sort of fused into that Metroidvania type game, you know what I mean? This is in roughly chronological order. So, I mean, I each time I sort of get a franchise, I take it through to its end, right? So I already did Super Mario, except I waited because there's a threshold when we go into 3D. So these things get reborn as 3D versions, but there's also a couple of games on the NES that were sort of my first RPGs and maybe direct JRPG ports. There weren't any American RPGs at that point. So of course it was fascinating to me as a kid, because we just this is the only way I got it. And there were all these sort of emblematic things and the way the story was told. And of course, Final Fantasy sort of picks up here and then is really reborn on PlayStation. Remember that? So like Final Fantasy VII was remade and reimagined, and it sort of changes. Mega Man was a big touchstone for me. It's sort of the whole world is machines, you know, so that was a lot of fun. You see that all the time. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pops up here and there. Metal Gear starts on the NES. And of course, it has all increasingly weird versions of it, right? It starts off as just pretty basic sort of military sabotage sort of feeling thing. And then by the end of it, of course, there's weird sort of beaked mechs and stuff like that. Everybody's very flamboyant. And, you know, I'm as much interested in sort of the user manual art as the game with a lot of those. So anyway, Sonic the Hedgehog. So the Sega Genesis came out. And I just remember, like, this was sort of the competitor to Mario, right? But Sonic does have this, like, really sort of distinct look, you know, with these very gameplay obvious loops and, you know, all these tracks that you can go through. And these loops, sometimes you get going so quickly on these levels. I'm going to come back to Sonic in a little while, but there's a couple of good versions of that. Another one that came out here that's not so well known is a game called Space Harrier. And this is sort of what I feel like is the beginning of games like, I don't know, Xenogears and I don't know, Lunar Silver Star, where you're in almost these abstract alien environments. And it's also very much 3D. It felt great, you know, when you played it. There's another one that it reminds me of, this is my only arcade game in here, was a game called Xevious. And it also seems to be sort of space sci-fi, but everything is also abstract. And occasionally there are just these weird sort of, it makes no sense, floating. There's these three-dimensional objects. They're just these pre-rendered, I can't even find one, but lots of fun. Things get very strange. And another one that I really like is Panzer Dragoon. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but this is sort of, I guess, sci-fi. And it's like Space Harrier, where you're going forward, but you're on this sort of shooting dragon, which was a lot of fun. Let's see, here we go. Here's another one. And then Sonic All-Stars Racing, which I have another sort of car racing section. I'm jumping way ahead, but there is just a really great Panzer Dragoon themed level. And just the design of it is really distinct. I'm going to back up here just a little bit, because here's those dragons again, right? But the world, like, the shader, you know what I mean? This is not shiny. It almost looks like it's made out of bone. You know, there's just, and the whole thing has this Panzer Dragoon, this sort of Germanic thing going on. There are tones of that, and that pops up in some other sort of JRPGs. The whole thing sort of seemed inscrutably futuristic and abstract, which is a sort of a theme. So SNES also introduced these sort of this F-Zero game, and F-Zero is sort of, I guess, the first of what we would call the anti-grav racing genre, if you know what I mean. And this is like speed is prioritized above realism, and there's lots of different sort of new manifestations of that. But one that I've been playing a bit is Red Out. And it's not easy, this game, you know, it's really hard to even place, but you can see like it barely even seems like a physical material world. It's like almost playing the UI itself, you know, it's just this abstraction of speed. There's a beautiful anime called Redline that I think really sort of captures this. Anyway, that is sort of a subgenre. Pilot Wings is another flying one, but it's much more meditative. I don't know if you've ever played any of the new ones, but this was the first flight sim where it's like, you're not going to die. And it's really just sort of about chilling in flying and enjoying that experience. And there are lots of different versions of that. Oh, I do have another arcade one. There was one in the arcade called Prop Cycle. And this was an arcade. Have you guys ever seen this? It's like there is a bicycle. You have to get on it and you have to pedal and you can lean it. And when you do, it makes this person fly their little prop cycle. So the sort of physical accessory thing, I was always very impressed with that in arcades. So. Anyway, I don't know if it has a particular aesthetic though. So here comes Mario Paint, the beginning of those creation sort of suites. And of course, now we have this Super Mario Maker 2. Mario Paint was great fun. And I have a friend who was an audio programmer, and he has, if you're interested in sort of MIDI programmatic music, he has a lot of very interesting thoughts on that. They don't do that anymore. Nintendo now just uses MP3s and waves, but there was a time when like the only music you could do there was the sort of through the chip. And for that reason, they had lots of games where it was like your actions were synchronized. Wind Waker, right? If you remember when you hit with Wind Waker, it has music cues, and it was possible to do quite a bit more, but in our haste to adopt MP3s and waves, we left that all behind, which is sad because there's stuff that could be done. Mario Kart. Look, I'm not even halfway through here. It just keeps going on and on and on. There's racing games, there's crash game. Race with Ryan, I played it, y'all. I took the hit for the team, and it's Ryan's World, the kart racer. So now I have kids, so we just download all the stuff all the time. We go through the Rare period and Star Fox, which is great. More flight games, Secret of Mana. I should stop. I'll stop. But there it is. You should look through it, I think, and just know that it's my perspective of when I made games, all those things were in play, right? And when I look at all the stuff that comes out now, right, I see that it's all of that aesthetic stuff is in play. So it was very easy to put this together. I just went on Wikipedia and sorted games chronologically by system, you know, and anytime I hit something like Super Mario, I sort of walked it up. There's a big, as I said, there is a threshold that this playlist crosses when we move into 3D, and you have sort of the mascot wars of Crash Bandicoot, and Rayman's interesting because it has a sort of a particularly French vibe. Michael Ancel, I think, is the designer for those, and did Rayman Legends, which is absolutely one of the best 2.5D side scrollers of all time, like remarkable, and also I feel has the best music levels of all time. So where you do have to synchronize everything to the music, and it's have you ever seen those levels? Because they are magic. In playing those things, you feel just incredible. This is the first music level. I don't know. So this is a French studio. They also worked on, I mean, it's Ubi Art Engine, which is an engine I do not. So this jumps. When you jump, it does that. Jump. I could do it without even looking. Jump. I've done it so many times. And if you mess up, the record scratches and stuff like that. But if you make it through the whole song, and the whole world is just falling apart right in front of you, and it's just, you feel like a badass. Terminator 2, which turns into the Rise, but also Uncharted, you know, and the Far Cries, the Desert Islands, realistic. Resident Evil with its constrained cameras, you know, they actually loosened that up in some of the later ones. But the thing about Resident Evil was that camera, you know, where you always felt confined, like you couldn't see. Silent Hill does the same thing with the fog. I would put Pro Skater in as world building because that was the first time I ever felt like a thug in an urban environment. And then when GTA came along, I was like, oh, this is just like Tony Hawk, except I can leave the skate park. You know what I mean? Like, and I can get in a car and do it. And then SSX sort of follows that. Ridge Racer begins as sort of realistic games. And of course, we're in the Forzas. I don't even know if this is up to date. When PS1 came out, there was this sort of slew of really weird Japanese games. Parappa the Rapper, Katamari Damacy, right? Things with a definitely like a, what is this? Sort of trying to blow your mind, which is great fun. Also, the aesthetic of being a tiny person in a big world, I think is part of both of those. The miniaturization, and Pikmin is a really good sort of example of just sort of, you see that? There's a bunch more. That game, you can get Rayman Legends online and it has, I mean, there's so much gameplay in that. I've started over multiple times. I never do that. Medal of Honor. By the way, Medal of Honor was written by Scott Rice, one of the film instructors over here. He's the guy who works with Matthew McConaughey and all that stuff. Call of Duty, Battlefield 1, Xenogears. Oh my gosh, it could go on and on. Lunar, the Silver Star. I wish I could comment endlessly on all of this stuff, but I should stop at some point. But yeah, that's it. And I'll keep working on it. My playthrough. I have some other playlists too, if you're interested. I mean, I don't put I usually only put tests up. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go. Let me just go to my playlist. But these are playlists that I share with my students sometimes. Oh man. But you know, I do teach the visual stuff. So, oh my gosh, history, watch later. Where are they? Playlists, A to Z. And I think I can view. All right, Mario Kart. Yeah, I have a lot of playlists. You know, anime. I usually ask my students, you know, that provocative question, what's the best anime of all time? And then they all hate each other by the end of it. So. I got a lot of sort of CGI for visual effects playlists and the idea of concept and beatboards and stuff like that. You're welcome to look through those, please do. Pretty easy to find, but and a lot of these load-ins are like if I'm doing an event and I just sort of need to set the theme. I think there may be even in like an environments, like a virtual environments one. So I don't know, you can take a look through it, but anyway, yeah, that's my playlist. Trying to get it all together. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Any questions or anything at all? Like me to say? Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, yes. So, you know, what happened with the plants thing, right, is that I had a big task, right, to sort of visualize a lot of different props and they were going to build it out, you know. And I just sort of went into it sort of knowing what I know, which is enough a lot of the time, right? And then, you know, I just had to go right back to the internet and start digging, you know what I mean? And most of the time I'll just use an image search to start, but usually what it ends up at is that I'll be doing sort of in Wikipedia, just sort of research. So for instance, I got into kelp in that, you're right, I started researching and I was like, oh, kelp has this certain look and I can mix it with cactus, you know, I can create sort of fantastic versions by blending these things together. So yeah, I think that there's this idea that you should be drawing all the time, but you know, a lot of concept art was, you know, just sort of the back and forth and how that happens, and communication is really sort of critical in all of that, like, you know, and you know, the research thing of real stuff was important, but we would also speak in that like, oh, it looks like the plant from Rayman Legends, you know what I mean? And we, you know, in any company I worked at, we would have a video game room, and of course, like you could always go there to play video games, and lots of people did for different reasons. The designers would do it for a different reason than the artists, but you know, I think the idea was like, yeah, you have to, we are drawing from this influence. And so, you know, looking back at that, how did they do it? Because likely somebody had to do a million versions of it back then. So yeah, just, you know, not stealing, I guess, but yeah, just trying to create the most comprehensive sort of whatever layout of ideas. That was the first part. And then the second part is sort of deciding like functionally what's going to work. Like, is this something that's so big or that it's going to need collision, right? You know what I mean? So, and if so, or if the designers were asking, like, we need something that you can knock down and get hearts out of or something, some sort of destructible. That would sort of, you would think about, usually what I would think about is the silhouette of the object. And then, you know, once I had really sort of clear, distinct silhouettes of stuff, I would, you know, slowly add in value, color, detail. And, you know, knowing that as concept art, it's really just going to be sort of about the direction you set. And you may not be the one who actually sort of builds the level, but, you know, or you might. You know, so in which case it's good to have that, it's going to do what I said I was going to do, and you can make some changes along the way. I found out from modeling that speeder bike that there were 3 versions. There was the conceptual one, and then somebody drew up schematics, and then when they built it, they just ran out of parts and they used bicycle handlebars or whatever. So they improvised a lot of the stuff at any point along the way. But yeah, and in reading, I like history books and stuff like that because, you know, I feel like when I like, they have something on a ship. And so they'll be naming things. This is the spar and this is the mast. And every time I hear a noun, I think that helps me, you know, just because of a sort of world building concept artist. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the phlegm baffle or the pernundle or whatever it is. So the pernundle is the thing that you change the gears on. P-R-N-D. That's good. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. And then just drawing a lot, just, you know, and being open to throwing it away. I think that was a big part of it. I think there are really good digital painters, and then concept or storyboard where it is sort of a collaborative thing is you have to sort of be okay with like, I am just going to sort of try to bring up the team vision here. And that usually played really well. So having some ideas up front, here's some things we could talk about. Feel free to throw them out. You know what I mean? I still get paid, you know, so if that's the case. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah. Cool. And then that was just about ideas. Execution, I guess, is a different thing entirely. Like perspective is helpful in figure drawing. Just do that all the time. Practice that as much as possible. Cool. All right. Anybody else? All right. Cool.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you very much. All right, yeah, and I'm over in RTF. If you ever want to look me up, Matthew knows where I am, right? So, cool. All right, thanks a bunch. I'll see y'all later. I'm out of here. Yeah, take it easy. Bye.